Hello, hello. I'm so happy to have Sian Sutherland back for a follow-up or a evolving conversation because we clearly didn't cover enough ground last time. Sian, thank you so much for taking the time and joining me again.
That is such a pleasure, Ved. Really lovely to see you again.
Great. So we covered a lot about your journey, about your funky escapades in different areas, and also a lot about the challenges with recycling. But then I was reading about these 10 beliefs that you've set up for the
Hmm.
plastic planet. And I think each one of them is so well thought of. So I want to first ask you, how did these 10 beliefs come about? And then I would love to literally dive into each one of them and understand what you really mean by them. Yeah, I'm excited to hear.
I think whenever people work with an individual or an organization, it's really helpful to have a fast track of what do they believe in, what do they stand for, what is their mission. And that's really what your website is meant to be, isn't it? It's the fast track to really get to the underbelly of what that organization is. So for us to create these 10 beliefs just felt like a real no brainer in a world where there are a lot of organizations that you're not really clear. Do they have the right agenda? Are they out there perhaps as, merchants of misinformation and doubt? Because certainly in our plastic space, which is so directly connected to the fossil fuel space, it is something that is rife with misinformation. So I think when we wrote our 10 beliefs, it was just very simply for us to set out our stall so that people knew this is what we believe. If you like what we believe, then great. Let's have a conversation. But if not, then we're not for you, and that's equally fine.
Oh, that's wonderful. And I was just thinking about our own website as we are creating it now, and I'm going to take those words and talk to our designers that it is a, as you said, it's a fast track to what you believe, what your beliefs are. I think that's such so
Yes.
well put. So starting with the first one, plastic crisis is a gift. What does that mean?
So this actually was something that was given to me by an extraordinary gentleman, Jeremy Oppenheim, who runs a company called Systemic, who are a consultancy that work with a lot of the big multinational companies and governments, and they advise them on many areas, some of them around plastic, definitely around climate and resource use. And we interviewed him, and one of the things that he said to me really struck me, and that was that the climate crisis is a gift. And I'd never heard that framing before, that it's a gift. And he said, I'm really excited because we're the generation that get that tap on the shoulder to say, hey, you can fix it. And it struck me that actually that's a really great framing for the plastic crisis because we talk a lot about the plastic crisis being a gateway to the climate crisis, a gateway to hyperconsumption, the raping of the planet of 2 planets worth of resource every single year, all the things that plastic has enabled us to do, a gateway to a huge amount of toxicity, our use of chemicals, a gateway to us for us to continue to use fossil fuels. Because, of course, if we wean ourselves from fossil fuels for energy, we also have to wean ourselves from fossil fuels for plastic, for materials, for fertilizers, for a lot of the different pharmaceuticals and things that we use fossil fuels for. So it struck me that expression of it's a gift rather than it being, of course, it's an aberration, of course, it's a crisis, but think of it as that tap on the shoulder, that little, hey, you've gone down a toxic cul-de-sac in your choice of materials here. You could have chosen renewable energy, regenerative materials, and instead you chose fossil fuels, unsustainable, and all the pollution and the plastic and the other products that come with that. So I feel that it could be that tap that takes us back to that right choice at that fork on the road.
So interesting that you say that. And then just before we hit record, I was telling you that I'm traveling in Guatemala right now. And you're so right in some ways, because when you cross these towns, you constantly see this litter and this garbage. And of course, as a mercenary myself, it's such a hit again and again that okay, we need to do something about this. We need to do something about it. So in a
Mm.
way, you're right. But of course, we created that crisis as well. And that takes me to the second one, which actually connects to that climate crisis in solid form.
Absolutely. So, as we know, we can put the responsibility for a large part of the climate crisis at the feet of the fossil fuel industry. That's indisputed now. Um, and then, of course, so what is the most famous byproduct from fossil fuels? The material of plastic. So it is the climate crisis in solid form for us because number one, it's made out of fossil fuels. 99% of all plastic is made directly from fossil fuels, but it's also the impact that it has. So it's the origins of where it comes from, the toxicity as that fuel is pulled out of the ground, the toxicity that is created, greenhouse gases and chemicals in the manufacture of the material itself, the devastation that causes, and the fact it never has an end of life. So when we look at these life cycle analysis, somebody said to me only yesterday, actually, we don't call it a life cycle analysis of plastic. We call it a death cycle of plastic because of the impact that it has as every single stage of its journey, to the fact that every single piece of it exists on the planet today unless it's been burnt. And we all know where burning fossil fuels has got us. So I think it's a great phrase to say it is climate crisis in solid form because it epitomizes so much. And when we go back to the thing I was just saying about hyperconsumption, it was, of course, the material that enabled us to pump out so much stuff that we could now afford to buy something, use it once and throw it in a bin. It broke that system. So our levels of hyperconsumption, our levels of fast fashion, ultra fast fashion, even things like ultra processed food, so many of these things that are a massive part of the climate crisis because of the resource, the pollutants that they use, and the devastation that they cause at every single level, being depletive and exploitative and pollutive, all of those things. Without the invention of plastic, we would be living in a very different way. So it is so much more than a material.
Very interesting. And I think that connects to your third one. Plastic broke the system.
Exactly. I've pretty much covered that. So that system for me, that it feels like that we've normalized waste, that we think it's convenience at any price is worth it. For us to be able to use something once and chuck it in the bin and never think about it again is worth the price of the fact that we now know what happens and there is no way. And it is only in very recent years, in the last 50, 60 years, that that system has been broken. I don't know about you, but when I grew up, we had a family of six at home. We had one bin, big old rusty metal bin. We would drag that out into the street. Didn't even have a bin bag. Nobody had bin bags then. You just had the bin. That was your container. It would be half full every single week. And now my sons have left home and I live in a London apartment with my husband, and we fill a bin, largely the recycling bin, pretty much every 2 days. That says so much to me of plastic has broken that system of take from nature, make, repair, reuse, share, rent, all the things that we've talked about already, to take, make, and throw it away. And that's the system that we need to go back to, but not in a way that is harking back to the 50s. I wasn't even born then, by the way, but I don't want to go back. I want to go forward. What I get excited about is what could retail look like in the future? I don't think retail in the future is going to look like the refill stores, God bless them, that we see today, where I've got to remember to carry some pots around with me just in case I go shopping. That's not, that level of inconvenience is never going to be adopted at scale. And we really should only focus on solutions that can be scaled speedily right now. So for me, looking into the future of how we're going to shop, what is the system of how we're going to shop? What is the system for how we dispose of everything? How can things be designed with not their first life in mind, but their second, third, fourth, fifth, forever life? How can we rethink how we make stuff at the very conception stage, rather than the designer receiving a brief saying, it's a liquid, it's 300 mil, we need a plastic bottle or something similar. You can use a recycled polymer. The creative industry have got no real input into the nascent beginnings of a brand or a product. And that's where we need them to be, because we need them to be designing for their second, third, fourth, fifth, forever life of the composition of materials that they are putting out onto the market. And people need to have responsibility for that. I think as a brand, if you have responsibility for not just the first life of the entire thing you put out, not just the product that you have to have product liability for, but the packaging that surrounds it, the impact of all of these things. If you had to think about it second, third, fourth, fifth, forever life, I think you'd really think differently about how you conceived it in the first place.
So each time you speak, you just like have this light bulbs going in my head. And that happened last time,
Oh.
and you're doing it again. I'm literally like 10,000 things that I want to talk to you about. But a few things that you mentioned, and they ring home for me. And like as I was going through the 10 beliefs, one of the things I told myself, I will not digress. I'll stay with your 10 beliefs, but I cannot not digress a little bit just to add my own experiences. So you mentioned garbage, and you're so right. I grew up in India, and in the 70s and 80s, when I was growing up, uh, literally it was an economy that was kind of closed. So I remember every plastic bag that my mother would receive, she would put it under the mattress because it had to be reused again, reused.
Mm,
And it was
mm,
such a prized possession. If somebody would come from abroad and they would get a very nice plastic bag, then, it had to be kept, and obviously it remained in use. And we knew where to find the carry bags. I don't think there was literally almost like, at least in my early years, there's probably nothing in that bin that wasn't organic. It was probably just going into some kind of organic waste.
mm-hmm.
The other thing that happened in India was very interesting when they started these waste to energy plants.
Yeah.
And we spoke about them a little bit. They didn't run in India because the ratio of waste was totally different. 70% was wet waste and only
Mm-hmm.
30% were dry waste. And then I shifted to the United States. And again, similar to you, I think I'm doing a little bit better. Maybe I do 2 weeks at least. My aim is to have not more than one bin liner in a month. But I think just now it's a cadence of 2 weeks. But that said, you're right about recycling. Every Amazon box, every
Yeah.
poly bottle that I'll get has to go into the recycling bin. And you're right, our bin probably does fill up once a week, and then goes out to the recycling, and we know what that is. And that'll take me to the next one, which we talked a lot. I wouldn't say a lot, but definitely a significant amount last time. But recycling isn't working,
Mm.
and then would love to again get a little bit more of your thoughts on that belief as well.
I think I could go in even further and say recycling for plastic is a chimera. It is a myth. It doesn't exist at scale. It is the placebo pill that we have been force fed for decades by big plastic to enable them, as we've discussed already, to keep pumping it out at the tap end. Let's focus on the waste. Let's focus on pollution. None of these things are the right thing to focus on. What we have to look at is how do we dramatically turn off the tap? How do we dramatically reduce primary plastic production? But continuing to believe that we put something in a bin and then somebody, some little recycling fairy takes it away and makes it into something else that is useful is a very difficult myth to unlearn, because we've spent so long now thinking that this is true, the thinking that all we need to do is recycle better. We just need to build more waste management. If only we could do that, then the problem would go away. What we're forgetting is you don't recycle plastic, you downcycle plastic. And of course, you have the chemicals that are contained within plastic. And I think maybe even last time we spoke, and I was saying that there are so many chemicals to give plastic its extraordinary qualities. And what the scientists like to think of it as spaghetti, and then you add the sauce. So it's really uninteresting and pretty unworkable and unpalatable, just as these long chain polymers. But then you add the sauce, you add the chemicals, and those chemicals make it stretchy or they make it rigid. Some plastics, 70% of the weight of the plastic is chemicals. We use 16,000 chemicals. So the other problem, even if there was a global recycling system that could address not just the PET bottle, but every kind of plastic that we use, from sneakers all the way through to tiny little sachets, the trillion sachets we pump out every year. Even if we could recycle it, even if there was an infrastructure, even if we doubled global recycling from 9% to 18%, then what's happening with those chemicals? Because those chemicals are the major problem, because as you recycle, you do not, they don't disappear. You compound those chemicals up. So that's one of the massive issues with recycling, that even if you don't talk about the energy requirements, the microplastics that are released every time you chop that plastic up for recycling, the trillions of microplastics that go out into the air. If you didn't think about that, if you didn't even talk about the fact that we are shipping the majority of our waste to other countries to deal with, and I have been to the rubbish dumps of Chennai and Nairobi and all of these places, and it is shameful to me that this is what the rich West are doing, offshoring our waste because we can't deal with it, so we give it to others to deal with. Even if all of that were fixed, we still have the problem with the chemicals. So I don't know, what other poisons do we try to give a second life to? Arsenic? I don't know. Rat poison. Like, we don't recycle these things. We will need to take them out of the system. So that's why I think it's very important that we recognize that recycling plastic is a chimera. And the sooner you wake up to the fact that you put it in the bin and it ain't going nowhere, and even if it's recycled once, it's downcycled, and then it won't be recycled again because it's such inferior quality. So you're just perpetuating the myth that this is the answer and we can keep pumping it out of the tap.
So yesterday, I have two girls who are traveling with me, 15 and 8, and they of course want to go and explore shopping. And we found this store called Mega Pakka, which was supposed to be this. I think we knew that it was like a second-hand clothes store, and we always want to encourage, pre-loved materials rather than buying new. So we took them there,
Absolutely.
and Sean, it was crazy. Exactly what you were talking about. This was fundamentally clothes coming from US, have been worn, all, I would say, 99% based on polyester.
Yeah.
Um, and of course, not in great condition, but the size of the store. I was stunned. The number of clothes just stacked on top of each
Yes.
other. So that's and shoes and all of that. And of course, not all of them are going to get consumed. So where does that go? And we've seen the Chilean desert, and they had a
Yes.
fashion show there recently with all the
Yes.
piles of
That was
rubbish.
extraordinary, wasn't it? With
Extraordinary.
that backdrop, I thought that was really
Exactly.
powerful. Kudos to that designer for doing that. I thought that was
Yeah.
really good. And you're right. And you look at Ghana. One village in Ghana receives 15 million pieces of donated clothing that we don't want, so we give it away in the name of charity every single week. 40% of them are considered waste. They don't even make it to any kind of market. They're considered waste and they're burnt. And as you say, the majority of them are plastic. So it's another export of our waste. It really is.
Yeah, it's crazy. I didn't know what to make of it, but it takes what you were talking about in terms of chemicals, and the next one is absolutely aligned to that. Is plastic is not on the periodic table, and I love it also because I'm so inspired by nature normally and nature's methodology for packaging, and I find
Yes.
that nature uses such a small part of the periodic table, and then still creates these amazing packaging products. But of course, let's expand on that one too.
So today, actually, I did an interview with the incredible Luke Haverholes. And Luke Haverholes is the founder of NFW. If anybody wants to check them out, nfw.earth. So he is a chemistry professor. He's an inventor. And what he was talking about is the abundance of nature, of the materials that nature knows how to take back, which are, a huge amount of that would be cellulose. And cellulose, as we know, that's what we make paper from. It's what we can make so many things from. But if we could learn how to work with the nutrients that nature gives us in that way, that would be the total game changer. Without toxifying it with chemicals, keep it in that nutrient status, everything that we talked about of that true circle of nature. Because it's so ubiquitous, this amazing but toxic, indestructible material. It's so prevalent in our lives. Paint on the wall, the varnish on this table, you know, the many of the components in the computer that we're speaking on now. It's everywhere. That it's, I think the second biggest user of plastic is not fashion, which you would expect. It's actually the built environment. The number one is packaging, number two is the built environment, and number three is the textile industry. So it just shows you the scale of plastic that there is within our buildings as well. And it's so prevalent that it's easy for us to think, well, it's a material in its own right. And that's why we put that belief out there of it is not on the periodic table. It is a mixture of chemicals. Many of them are toxic to humans and every living thing on the planet. So we need to stop thinking of it as a primary material in itself. No, it's some polymers with a load of chemical source added. And that's where the problems really start.
And that's amazing. And I never conceived that the built environment is higher than clothes. But now that you say it, it makes sense because, lots of our even furniture these days is all compressed, kind of some polymer in it. And are
Yeah.
you also considering like the bitumenized roads in that built environment? Because bitumen is all
Yes.
poly as well.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
huge.
Tires, of course, we have,
Yeah.
I haven't included tires in that, but of course tires. And we know that the shedding from tires, the micro granules that come off tires are hugely toxic for us. Again, that's about chemicals. It's about plastics. It's all the things that we make that we believe we cannot live without. And I don't think that we have to live without. I think we need the imperative to rethink, to reimagine, reinvent. I think the human race is extraordinary. We just have not been given the mandate, the imperative that we need to do it and we need to do it fast. And of course, the money. We need to switch the funding. Like, we are still uh, subsidizing fossil fuels at the rate of 7 trillion. Why do we not take that 7 trillion and reinvent the materials industry? Reinvent, restore the food industry that we really, if you look at our relationship with materials and our relationship with fashion, our relationship with food, all of these systems are broken. We need to take that money and we need to invest it into innovation to give us human based, human centric, and nature centric solutions.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. And I do have a follow-up question, but I'm not going to I'm not going to digress. This is my promise to myself. But I'll come back to that question. I have it noted on the side in terms of the fund flow side of it. And I love the next one as well. Why is there a bin? And I also love it because whenever somebody asks me what my final question is going to be to you, what is good garbage? I feel that there should be no garbage as such. And it should be ideally a single bin that is all getting upcycled into compost. So that's an ideal state from my perspective. But I would love to hear yours on why is there a bin?
This really came from a journalist calling me and saying that Rishi Sunak, who was our prime minister at the time, let's say, who knows when this is going to go out, that he had come out saying, by the way, we're not going to enforce this regulation that we have to have 6 or 7 bins in every kitchen for you to segregate your recycling. And so the journalist rang to say, what do you think about this? 6 or 7 bins. I mean, who's got room? We live in small flats and apartments. Who's got room for 6 or 7 bins? And we've got a cost of living crisis. So who can possibly afford to go out and buy all these bins? And I had to say, I think you're asking the wrong question. I think the question we should really be asking ourselves is not how many bins are the right number of bins for us to have in our kitchen. It's why is there a bin at all? Because why do we think the human race is the only species on the planet that has the right to create waste when there is no other species on the planet that creates waste? And that's when I talk about how we've normalized it. We don't even question how many bins do we need? Like, is it 2? Is it 3? Do we have to segregate our glass and our metal? It's just, no. Why is anything being thrown away when it has taken so much resource to take it from the natural environment in the first place, to make something out of it, the energy that is used for that, to then chuck it away? How crazy is that? So I really understand when people say we need to reframe waste as resource. We shouldn't call it waste anymore. We should call it resource. But the way that our systems are built today, there's nobody that is going to look in most bins and say, "Ooh, check out all that resource in there," because it's contaminated with food, it's broken, it's designed for single use. So we will never consider waste or something at the end of our personal useful life for it. We will never consider it anything other than waste unless it's been designed differently at the beginning. And that's when I look at things like returnable systems. And how great would it be that we had a returnable packaging system? So that bin in your kitchen is a returnable bin, same collection system, but it goes back into an umbrella system where it is washed and reused and redistributed to the brands that use it. And we have standardized packaging across competitive brands and retailers, because that for me has to be the nirvana, because then you are reusing something many, many times. You are every industry is using common componentry. Look at the aluminium can. Imagine you designed the aluminium can slightly differently and it was labeled, and you simply had a system where you could wash it, relabel, refill it, label it, and sell it again. It is slightly crazy, this obsession with the fact that we can only use something once and it has to go in a bin and therefore into a recycling system, particularly with plastic, one that doesn't exist. But even with metal and glass and paper, isn't it crazy that we think in such a single use way now? So that's my pushback really, is why is there any bin other than something which is perhaps a returnable bin?
It's so profound. I think you're saying that, we are the only species that thinks like that. And also, I
Mm.
struggle with this myself at work because I think our minds have become all about end of use treatment. And that's really, it's a misnomer because ultimately, ideally, you want to treat it as close to the source as possible, or
Hmm.
not have to treat it at all, like you were saying, kind of just
Yeah,
go wash reuse, and have something and design something for perpetuity. But the challenge that is there, and you and I both know it, and probably it's there in one of your beliefs as well, is the consumerism, right? If it's industries, how do we sell more? Because that more
yeah.
comes through fast fashion and packaging and all of that. So it's that desire for more that creates that virtuous, not virtuous, actually, the cycle that just carries on and on. And I think your next one is also so linked in a way, disconnected and linked, which is save our soil. Because again, like we come from this belief that all packaging must be upcycled into soil, into compost. But the challenge is exactly more complex because what about land use? Are people really using the compost? Is there a market for compost? Is there an economic value? Is there somebody who will take it? Because that part is also governed by the NPKs and the fertilizers and the pesticides that are not organic, and of course that's harming our land. But let's
Hmm.
click on this one, the save our soil, and how does that connect into the system as well?
We need to remember that 90% of our food comes from our soil. This vital top 6-inch layer that covers most of our land. And we have been at war with our soil for many, many years with our monoculture crops, with our overuse of pesticides and herbicides, and our fertilizer systems, all of these things. And let's drill back and think, and where do they derive from? Largely fossil fuels again. So we have created this dependency that we now need to fuel the soil, feed the soil for it to give us what we need, because we have destroyed the soil. We have stripped everything out of it. And plastic is a major contributor to that, because we now have plastic in rain. There is up to, how many times is it? It's up to 40 times as much plastic in our soil as there is in our oceans. And very, very few people talk about
Wow.
this. We don't
Yeah,
think
that's
about the amount.
crazy.
Yeah, because if you think, where does most of it come from to our ocean? It comes through the tributaries. It comes from the open landfill sites. It comes from the waste dumps. And so those microplastics and the small and the larger pieces of plastic are coming through the rivers. and the rivers also are feeding the soil. So I know that the other problem that we have is compost. And a lot of the compost that we are putting on our soils is contaminated with plastic. And I learned recently some extraordinary facts that after 20 years of urban composting, per hectare, we have 400 kilograms of microplastics, which is a phenomenal thought. And this equates to 80,000 plastic bags per hectare. And
Wow, those are crazy
this is
numbers.
crazy numbers. And we are deliberately, and so these are microscopic because these are invisible to the human eye. And they are coming through the fact that we are putting silage, we're putting animal silage. And of course, the animals are eating microplastics, they're breathing microplastics, they're all the way through their gut. So there's plastic in the silage that we're then using as fertilizer. So it's an extraordinarily big problem, the microplastic in the soil, that will be impacting the life of that soil. And one of the facts that I absolutely love from this extraordinary film called Kiss the Ground, I don't know if you've seen it. You've seen it,
Yes,
and
I
it's
have.
just
Yeah, it's
it just
wonderful.
makes you fall in love with soil. But that one statement of in this handful of soil, there are more microbes and more life than humans have ever inhabited planet Earth in one handful of soil. And now our soil is going from soil to dirt to dust because we are taking all the life out of it. And we have to have that life because if we need soil that can take the climate crisis floods and the droughts, then we have to invest in the soil right now. Because when the rains come, you have seen those baked earths and the water just runs off. It doesn't penetrate the soil. It's too hard. So we have to have healthy, fertile soil. Otherwise, that is 90% of our food systems gone.
Yeah, and it's amazing how little we realize because so many of us are living in the urban world where we don't even know where the food is coming from. And again, um, watching watching an economy like India again, which is kind of just growing at such a pace, I am amazed at what development means. As soon as you hear the phrase, "Oh, this place is getting developed,"
Mm-hmm.
it breaks my heart because what it really means is it's getting more malls, more
Yeah.
buildings, more cinemas, more urban roads and large apartment buildings. And I don't know where the tipping point is because I keep thinking it's going to come now because all this area is being taken by farmland, from farmland. We are degrading soil, so there's lesser production. We are taking away farmland and building what we call development.
Mm-hmm.
And we are expecting that the food security will be just there in perpetuity. So I don't know when that tipping point is because, of course, we measure things in our life kind of spans, which is a very, very short kind of blink of an eye in terms of the
Mm-hmm.
planet. But I just keep thinking, and it kind of my heart sinks thinking, what are we doing? Why are we not thinking well enough for the future? And just building and building and building. And in my lifetime, I've at least seen the city that I grew up in probably grow three times and take away that much land from farms and no real good regulation being there. So I'm just waiting. When is that tipping point going to come when we realize that we can't keep doing that in perpetuity? And that actually takes me it connects really well to take less from nature. So would love to
Yes.
hear from you more about that and any comments on what my rant was as well.
I completely agree with you. And we're seeing this mass urbanization, the sprawl of the city and the concreting of everything. And we all know the problems of concrete. It's exciting to see some of these buildings now being made out of wood again and to see us introducing more natural materials, which is really important because just the amount of plastic within our environment in our cities is phenomenal. But I read somewhere that actually the air pollution often is worse in your apartment than on the city street because of the amount of persistent chemicals, the PCPs that you have, the fire retardants on your furniture, the microplastics that are shedding everywhere, all of these things. which is a horrible thought, isn't it? That we think we're in our own little sanctuary. And actually, it's not a sanctuary at all. It's one of the most polluted spaces that we could be in. So taking less from nature is so inevitable. We believe that we can have infinite growth on a planet of finite resources. There is one planet, one ocean. It regenerates itself. Unbelievably, it regenerates itself. But at the moment, we are taking 1.7 planets worth of resource every single year. So we are literally taking the resources that our children are entitled to. We're taking those resources from their future. We're making stuff with them today and selling them in the name of GDP, in the name of profit. And this is when we come back to the whole thing of consumerism. And this is not necessarily about we need to make less stuff. We just need to make stuff differently. And then surely, if we still want to sell things, of course, we still want economy and we want growth. But imagine if instead of buying something to get that dopamine hit and feel good, I did something. I had an experience. I had an adventure. I went to see a beautiful film. I mean, those are the things for me that feed my soul a lot more than buying yet another fast fashion outfit. Being with people, community, eating together, all of those things. Imagine if we spent our money in that way rather than buying more stuff. And imagine if then industry answered that by saying, so we're going to create more extraordinary experiences. We're going, tourism, let's decarbonize aviation so that we can travel and we can experience each other's communities and cultures and therefore have more empathy. Even that, we need to travel in a different way. So I think there's so much opportunity, which means we could take less from nature because we're making less stuff, but we could experience even more. And that's the exciting thing, that we always think this is about less. This is about degrowth. This is about economies tanking because we have built our economies on making things. Let's build our economies on making experiences. Wouldn't that be extraordinary?
Absolutely. And this reminded me, I had a big grin as you were saying that, because my wife, early on, as our kids were really young, she said, we are not going to have presents for birthdays. Well, we are going to have presents for birthdays, but you're going to choose your adventure. That's your present. So it's
Yes.
so interesting now that our oldest is 21. I find that, she has such richness in her life because,
Mm.
one birthday she went scuba diving and then skiing and then hiking and then climbing and then bouldering and then, and then the next one did hers and the third one did hers. And I think they are so enriched and they have such great experiences. I wouldn't even remember what somebody gave me on my birthday 5 years back, right? But they remember those
Exactly.
things and
Yeah.
they became, well, yeah, it's
It's
amazing,
so
right?
important. I've done
Yeah.
exactly the same. So my sons, when my youngest was 21, I said, you're going to have three experiences. And luckily his mum went on every one of his experiences. So I got very lucky.
We are
But we
excited
did
too. We were
amazing things.
excited too.
Yeah. We did amazing things. They were unforgettable. The bond that gives to have those adventures together. And it doesn't always have to be about big things, of scuba diving, or it could be small things that could be so much. Because as we know as a parent, the biggest gift you could ever give your child is time.
Oh,
And we forget
absolutely. Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
and it's easy because we're so busy. We're so busy with building our careers and paying the mortgages and all of these things. It's really difficult to not remember that actually this is the most important thing.
Yeah, and what you were saying, I'm going to comment on that also because yes, you're right. We did smaller things like our daughter who's now 15, but she just wanted to go and see a waterfall. So it was just that. Take me to a waterfall. I want to go on a train journey. So it was one of those. So it could be small,
Yeah.
big, but yeah, but there's so much of gathering of experiences, and I'm so thankful to my wife for that too. Also because the kind of person she is. Once I remember I was sitting with a friend and she was dealing in diamonds, and she said, "Oh, you must take a jewelry thing for your wife." And I was like, "My wife is going to kill me if I take diamonds for her." She said, "What? No, every woman loves diamonds." I was like, "She was an activist against blood diamonds. She's definitely
Ah,
throwing me out of the house." So she said, "No, no, no." And then she said, "Okay, if she doesn't like diamonds, what is the thing that you can take her which is of value, material value, and she'll not refuse?" So I thought about it and I said, plane tickets. She'll never refuse travel. She'll not even think about it. She'll be like, okay,
Love
let's go.
that.
So, so yeah, these experiences count so much. And of
Hmm.
course, the next one, which you say pro business, scalable, global solutions, and we're going to talk more about it as we go ahead. But let me ask you on this belief as well. What do you think? What is your thinking behind this one?
You'll not be surprised to hear that as an entrepreneur, I believe in the power of business. And that's why A Plastic Planet has always been very focused on working with industry. So, bringing solutions to industry, but also pressuring them to do the right thing, calling them out when they do the right thing, but then also calling them out when they do the wrong thing. And then governments. But the reality is that our governments think in very, very short 4-year terms maximum. As soon as they're voted in, they're thinking about how they can stay in. And so our policies are popularist, short-termist policies. And it has not served us well as humanity, this system of government. I'm trying to think, I believe it's China has a 100-year plan. That's what we need. Every country needs to have a 100-year plan, that we all understand what it's going to be. We understand where future generations, what they're going to be born into. We understand what those goals are and the metrics of success in that 100-year plan. But no, we think in 3 or 4 year terms, and it cannot work when you're talking about some of the extraordinary changes that we need to see. Business, however, can be more reactive, can drive things, and in most countries, governments do what business tells them to do because business is incredibly powerful because they are the money. And money speaks, and it speaks for policy, it speaks for everything, it speaks for law. So that's why we say that we have to work with industry, and we have to empower them with solutions. I think everybody is fundamentally born good, even if you're running a big pollutive, exploitative company. I don't think you feel very good about going home and telling your kids what you did that day. And you might drink the corporate Kool-Aid and you might tell yourself it's all fine. But I think in your heart of hearts, now we all know what we know, the situation that we're in right now, at this narrowing window that we have to take action against climate. I think people feel very responsible with what they do at work. So we need to tap into those hearts for those people within industry. And the thing about global scale is, of course, there's these wonderful little startups who are doing extraordinary things, but they are not going to move the dial. We have to work with the big guys. We have to work with the big polluters, the people that can actually create new systems that then everybody can adopt, that can collaborate with the other huge multinationals so that we can make dramatic change happen, not just these little incremental chinks on the dial. It's very, very difficult for these big corporations to move. They are wedded to the current systems, to the current reporting systems, to the hierarchy of responsibility, right the way up to the stakeholders, to the shareholders, to the fact that most companies are wedded to fossil fuels still. So it's very difficult to take those Titanics and not just move them out of the way of the iceberg, but pick them up and put them in an entirely different ocean. So the small guys, for me, not only are incredible at showing that things can work, that solutions are out there, that they can be profitable, but also I would imagine that they are the way that the big guys are going to shift through acquisition, through perhaps letting the systems that they currently have naturally wind down, and then through acquisition wind up and really pump a lot of investment into the companies that they know will be part of the future.
And thankfully, they seem to be doing that. A lot of the companies that we talked to today are exploring exactly what you're saying. But as you were speaking, a couple of incidences came to my mind. We were going to start setting up a factory in Guatemala, and the CEO here came and said, "No, "We don't need to really purchase land. We can just lease it, and it's much cheaper. You don't have to put in that kind of capex." I said, "Sure, if they lease it
Mm-hmm.
for 500 years, that's fine." He was like, 500 years? They'll lease it for 20 or 30. I said, we are not setting up something for 20 or 30 years. It's a minimum of 500. So if you
I
can
love
get
that.
that, then we talk. Otherwise, there is no conversation. You buy the land otherwise, and then you set it up according to how you want. And the other one, which came to my mind as you were talking about bigger organization, is that there's a huge challenge for them because of the scale as well in terms of their consumption. We were working with Unilever and with the small sachets, and they needed just to replace that one shampoo sachet, they needed 16,000 tons. And that's a huge challenge for them. How does one shift till they don't have a skill? You
Mm,
can't like kind of shift in part. So that was a challenge, and we are still working on that, and hopefully getting a solution to them at that scale. But that's the reverse kind of challenge they face. And when we are introducing products, you're so right. It's so much easier to work with nimble, smaller companies and get the
hmm
product out there, and then that becomes visible to a larger company, and then they shift. Which is what we are noticing as we are moving towards shifting, say, flexible packaging materials. That go for the smaller ones. Don't even engage too deeply with the larger ones, because there's going to be a 2-3 year kind of testing cycle, and that
Yeah.
you have to produce and sell. So go for those, and then eventually the bigger ones are going to start shifting along the line. And of course, the last one, and of course, so important, is the legislation and taxation to create innovation. And I think we talked
hmm
about it in the last recording, where I saw that just a rumor of plastic ban build
hmm
this huge momentum towards innovation. And as soon as
Yes.
that rumor was gone, everybody went back to
Yeah.
usual. So
Yeah.
so this is such a huge one, and love to hear your thoughts on that.
So we're speaking in a very interesting year because, of course, this is the year that we should have a UN Global Plastics Treaty in place. Let's see if that happens by the end of the year. It is a rare moment, I think, for the world to come together in the way that we did for things like CFCs or other. I'm thinking about things like asbestos, where we all agreed that we could come together and we could fix some of these problems. The plastic problem, as we know, is vast because it is everywhere and it's within every single industry at a very, very deep level in every country. And then we have the waste issue and the fact that we're never ever going to be able to clean up the oceans. What we have to do is dramatically accelerate laws and bans, because it is only when we ban something, just as you were saying, as soon as you start talking about a plastic bag ban, suddenly there's a huge amount of money goes into innovation. But you cannot expect industry to move from their current systems without certainty, because they are so terrified of doing the wrong thing, of adopting perhaps the slightly less bad material that is not going to be the final one. They're not allowed the funds for the level of innovation. We have to remember, it's to create a new material can cost $100 million. If you are talking about a material that is going to be used at extraordinary scale, so let's say trillions of bottles, can you imagine the billions that have gone into innovating the PET bottle to be this incredibly high performing bottle that it is today? That didn't just happen. That has been decades of extraordinary levels of investment. It's the same with everything within plastic. It has had so much money pumped into it. And here we have these tiny little startups who are using plant protein and algae and seaweed and cellulosic fibers and all these wonderful things and agri waste, trying to scrabble innovation budgets together really on a relative shoestring. Without laws, we don't give business certainty, and the innovation won't happen because the funds won't move. And we need to move the money in a much, much bigger way. And that's only going to happen when law falls into place. And the flip side of law for me is, of course, what's the other massive lever of change for industry and governments is risk. And when you look at the impact on human health, the impact on the life of every single creature on planet Earth with the toxic material of plastic, and the potential impending lawsuits around ecocide, around the fact that so many people can no longer conceive a child. When you think about the scale of risk that companies that continue to use plastic as their default material, that's another incredible use of law. we need those lawsuits to happen.
Oh, absolutely. And give us a little more insight into, of course, the global plastic treaty that is going to happen in Korea. What are your expectations? And you sit on so many of these tables, and what are the opposing forces like? Because, in the end, it's a balance, and there's a whole side of lobbying of, self-interest and different kind of
Yes.
perspectives. And how do you see that balancing out? Is it just about my voice against yours? How do you see this ideal scenario being created and the governments acting in kind of alignment with what we would consider to be the right direction?
It's an incredibly interesting process to witness. And I've never been to a UN negotiation session before attending the INCs. And as you know, there are five. And I was at the second, third, and fourth INC. So in Paris, Nairobi, and then Ottawa. And then, as you mentioned, the final one is meant to be in Busan in South Korea at the beginning of December this year. And that is meant to be where we have the final treaty wording, and we have as close to unanimous agreement for that as possible. But just to witness how these things work is really extraordinary. To witness the amount of fossil fuel lobbying that is absolutely shamefully blatant. In Ottawa, there was 193, I think, fossil fuel lobbyists in the negotiating chambers themselves. There was massive hoardings and campaigns and digital screens and bus sides and big vans driving around at the hotels where every poster was promoting plastic by saying, these plastics are vital to stop food waste. These plastics are vital to give refugees water. Really tugging at all those kind of emotional heartstrings, because we can deliver water to refugees in a different way. We can protect food in a different way. But it was propaganda like I've never seen before, really extraordinary. And then you look at the delegates, the negotiators for the delegate member states, of which there's 170, 180 countries attending as part of these negotiations. And my heart just goes out to them that they have to know so much about everything. And you have rich nations like Norway, who will have 30 or 40 science advisors, let's say, so that their negotiators can be pretty well educated on everything they need to know at every single level. And then you have the small island states of, let's say, for example, Palau, a member state. Their vote, I think, I forget how many people live in Palau, but it's, it's a bare few thousand, let's say. Their member vote counts as much as the vote of America, the vote of Russia. So it's extraordinarily democratic in that way. But it also struck me, how can these small member states have access to the information that the big guys do? How can they not be subjected negatively to the lobbying by the fossil fuel industry? And then you have the treaty itself, and you have one group that are backing a high ambition treaty that is actually saying we need to consider human health, we need to consider the full life cycle of plastic from the minute it's extracted to its never-ending end of life. And we also need to consider a cap on primary plastic production. So you have several member state countries who have signed up to that high level ambition. You then have the low level ambition. And then there is even now a zero ambition treaty. And the zero ambition, as you can imagine, and the low ambition is backed by many countries who do not want to see this change happen. And they will inevitably be the oil producing nations. So Saudi, India, Russia, Iran, all of these are backing low to zero ambition treaties. So it's a really, really interesting thing to see how all of this happens. And where we are today is we have a 60-page treaty, over 60 pages. There are 3,000 bracketed words in those 60 pages, 3,000 bracketed words, which shows you how much work there is still to do. There are certain areas that are really not covered in nearly enough depth. At the beginning of this process, human health, full life cycle, and legally binding. They were the three things that everybody was so excited about. There's a lot of lip service to the first two, which is the full life cycle and it actually including the impact on human health. So I think we have a long way to go. But when I talk to people who know a lot more about these processes than me, they are not pessimistic. They believe that where we have got to, it's extraordinary that we've got this far, that we are in record time trying to put a treaty together. It took 5 years for the Paris Agreement. And the problem, of course, with the Paris Agreement, as we can see now, is that it wasn't legally binding. The difference with this treaty is it will be legally binding. It also doesn't need every single member state to agree, which you normally need for any kind of UN treaty. So it's now been agreed that perhaps it can be less than 100%, because there will always be member states, perhaps Saudi, who do not want to see any kind of plastic treaty in place and they will vote against it, whatever. So I think we're in a really interesting space with all of these people coming together. Our role is that we bring the health scientists to ensure that the impact on human health is absolutely heard by all negotiators, policymakers, the people that are attending there, the brands, because of course brands are also coming, the Unilevers of the world, they attend, the Mars, all these big consumer brands, because they are going to be very impacted. So they also want their voice to be heard. So it's an extraordinary process to witness. I hope that we will have something that we can all be proud of at the end of it. There are many people, including the US government, who have said to me already, you will not see the things that you want to see in the final treaty. But we need to celebrate it, whatever, because it's a beginning, not an end, which saddens me because that sounds like a very defeatist attitude by the biggest economy in the world. And we need America to step up and really show leadership here.
Yeah, I
So
can't
that's
even
my
imagine.
snapshot,
Yeah,
really.
yeah, I know. I can't even imagine how complex it is to, bring so many different stakeholders, point of views, and belief systems as well. Like I guess you may be right what you said earlier. There is an understanding that everybody has. It's just that they have their vested interests to look after, and I can't even imagine what and how does it actually reach a conclusion. What do you think of the argument that I hear many times with developing economies that you guys have done, or the developed economies have had this luxury of having used all this fuel and coal and all of that, and now you're asking us while we are developing to not use it. I kind of find it two-sided. Why not leapfrog? One is that belief, and
Exactly.
the other is that like, okay, if they've used it, two wrongs don't make a right. And how do you see
Mm-hmm.
that? How does it feel for you, and how does it sit for you?
I'm very struck by the people that are going to be impacted by the climate crisis and are currently impacted by the plastic crisis, are the ones that didn't cause it. And we should all carry that guilt, that responsibility, and be vocal about it and talk about it, because I think the small island developing states, particularly the large parts of the global south, are going to be extremely damaged by what we have done by the northern hemisphere, the rich West, and we need to make reparation for that. And it was interesting to me actually at the last INC in Ottawa that there are representatives there from the waste picking organizations of India and Africa. They're all there, Indonesia, which is really good because of course they have to be there. And it was the first time that I'd heard the waste pickers talk about reparation, and reparation for the illnesses, for the sickness that has been wreaked upon the people that live on the rubbish dumps that are picking our waste. And so I thought that was a really interesting evolution, really, in the narrative, that this is no longer about just transition. That's been the phrase that everybody talks about. What jobs are the waste pickers going to do? And in fact, now what we should be talking about is how can we make it up to them? How can we, repay them for what they have already done? So I think that's a really good and interesting evolution in the narrative, and it's absolutely right that reparation is due. not just in the plastic crisis, obviously in the entire climate crisis. But what you've just said, Ben, is I believe is absolutely right. We need to leapfrog. Don't make the mistakes that we have made. And it's fascinating to me when I look at China, and you look at China that 50% of the vehicles on the road are electrified. They're already making new kind of salt and iron ore based batteries so that they don't need all the rare precious metals. So they're already the thing about China that's so extraordinary is when they move because they don't have this pesky thing called democracy. So when they decide, clean green China, then they're going to do it. And so I take great hope, to be honest, in the fact that we have huge economic entities like that who are leapfrogging from the Cultural Revolution and almost leapfrogging a large part of the Industrial Revolution that we have been part of to this technological revolution. And hopefully they will also embrace the natural revolution, because that's really where we need to get to. And learn from the mistakes that we've made. And we all used to idolize the US. Everything American. It was everything American was better for us, bigger, brighter, just more interesting on every single level. And I hope that we've learned that that was not really true, and that we could learn a lot from the extremities that you see in America, the uprising of the far right, the discord, the drug, the opioid crisis over there, the mental health crisis. And, we are not immune in Europe in any way, that we have our fair share of that. But it is at such an endemic, extraordinary level in the US. And we have to ask ourselves, where has this stemmed from? When did it begin? All of these addictions to buying, to consuming, our relationships with food, our mental health crisis, our loneliness. I think we can tie it very closely to the climate crisis, because these things are not happening at the same time at a pure coincidence. These things are happening because we have lost connection with our place in the natural world, and we need to get that back. So I hope that as these new economies, as they thrive in a much healthier way than the previous economies.
Absolutely. And obesity,
And
the kind of
obesity.
personal damage we are doing. I keep saying that, you don't actually have to take care of the Earth's health. You just take care of your health. Earth will be fine. You'll consume less processed food. You'll kind of
Yeah,
go more natural, be nearer to the source, don't eat all the time. And if you do all of that, the Earth is going to be fine if you take care of your own health. And it also kind of reminded me of my very, very dear friend, Lian Hoa, who believes that 100 years back, all our rivers were drinkable. So she has this whole
mm,
movement called drinkable rivers. I think she's done a walk in England as well with the Thames. I joined her on a walk when she was doing River Mass, where she would walk from the source to the end and talk to kids along the way, do experiments with them, show them what is in the water, talk to the local mayors, etc. And it was very interesting. It was totally baffling for me. What she found in huge quantities, Sean, was antidepressants in the water. Imagine that, river water. It was like literally, because so much of it goes with our liquids that are thrown from the body and it
yeah,
ends up in the river. It was amazing the amount of antidepressants we are taking in, right? And that was a
yeah.
shock to me. But,
I bet,
but
and I bet the other thing
please,
must be
please, yeah.
antibiotics, and obviously the
Sure.
contraceptive pill. You know,
Yep.
so
Yeah, that is
estrogen.
another thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I know we have gone crazy with chemicals, and we can have chemicals for good, and chemicals save us, but they also really harm us, and the devastation we've wreaked on nature through chemicals, the forever
Yeah.
chemicals, all the things that we know is really shocking.
Yeah, I would have never imagined that you would find chemicals in the river which were so profound. And every beaker, every test tube that she filled, it was there.
Yeah,
So it was amazing for me to see it firsthand, just walking and testing with her. Uh, the other one which I find really, really challenging is that we can make all the laws that we want, and it is going to impact innovation and there's going to be progress. But implementation and execution of those laws, especially when I see economies where the law enforcement is relatively weak and it is also corrupt many times. And how
Hmm.
do you see that? Because you can make all the laws, you can have a global plastic treaty, and then the nations can be like, oh,
Yeah,
bugger it. We are not going to bother too
exactly.
much with it. There are vested interests again. And, we can ban the plastic, but then every shop is still has plastic. So how do you see that? How do you see implementation changing over time?
It's a really difficult one, isn't it? Because you're right, we bring in a treaty, and who's going to police it? One of the things that I'm very passionate about is that we actually create a global law for ecocide. That if you damage nature, if you destroy nature, then you have to be culpable for that because the impact on everything else. Um, but who's going to police that? And what is it going to be? Is it a prisonable offence? Is it a finable offence? Because we know how fines work with big business now, that you build it in as a cost of business. So it's a really great question of how are we going to police these laws, which really takes you back to, is it a carrot or a stick? Or is it the fact that we need to reconnect with ourselves on a much, much deeper level? We need to remember what it is to be human. And if we could remember what it is to be human, then perhaps these things wouldn't be needed. If we could reconnect with nature, if we could heal that broken bond between ourselves and the natural world, recognize our place in the natural world as one species of many, that it's not there as a treasure chest for us to plunder, to destroy other species at our own whim, then if we could get to that place, if we could remember that we are not born evil, we are not born filled with greed and avarice, and we are only motivated by transactional behaviors where we benefit and it's all about money, that would be an extraordinary thing. And I learned recently that when a baby is born, you have two instincts. You have love and you have fear. And it's almost like the world at the moment is being run on fear. You see it in the US, you see it in parts of Europe, the elections that are happening right now. People are fearful of other people coming into their countries, terrified of immigration taking our jobs. You look in America, let's build a wall with Mexico. You can't take our guns, you can't take our rights away. All of these things, and everything is put out there through fear. That's how we are ruled. Imagine if we could flip that switch from fear to love. That's got to be the goal. And if I had one mission in life, it would be, how can we build a movement? All the good work that you're doing, that everybody that you interview, so many great people, we're all building a bridge to a different future. What if we could all come together? And we're still doing all our different actions because these are all the different doors, the different trapdoors to get to that different future. But we all came together as this one great big mother motorway that demanded that we need to change the rhetoric, that we need to stop this disinformation that this is the only way that humans can be, that trickle-down economics is the solution, because let's look at the proof. Trickle-down economics has stopped at that 1%. It has not worked. And too much power is held in the hands of too few. Too much money is held in the hands of too few. And there is no equality in the world. And people will never feel content and happy if there is not more equality in the world. So we need to flip that switch from fear to love.
I couldn't agree more, and that's so beautifully put. And the other one, which is interesting that you mentioned it, habit change. How does that happen at scale? And kind of it connects with what you were talking about. And how should that public discourse change? And it connects well with what we were talking about earlier in terms of policy makers. End of the day, most of the countries that are democratic, the politicians are driven by the fact that what are their constituents going to vote for in the end. So if the
Mm-hmm.
public discourse shifts and the public thought process shifts, then there is a higher chance of the policymakers and their actions shifting. So how do you see that habit change happen at scale? We're not talking about 5% and 10%. How do we go beyond 30, 40, 50% people wanting and actively looking towards their own actions? How do you see that happening in the future?
Apparently, you only need 14% of people to all adopt an action to get a tipping point. So we think that you need a majority to get that tipping point, but apparently you don't. Apparently it's far fewer. And I don't know if we can, one of the projects that I've been loosely involved in this year has been with the Vatican, and Pope Francis had brought a number of people together, including 30 Nobel laureates last year, to talk about this new fraternity community. So he's created a foundation which is really a declaration of fraternity. How can humans all act as one in a very different way, because we are one? And this year, he got everybody together some 2 months ago in the Vatican to talk about what does it mean to be human. So to redefine the human code. And I found this really interesting to see that you've got somebody like Pope Francis, and whatever your opinion is of the Catholic Church, I think people are pretty unanimous that this is a very unusual Pope, and he does very unusual things, and he washes the feet of the refugees from Syria on the Greek island shores, and I think he's a very different kind of Pope. And so I was fascinated to see who is going to be that leader. And could it be all the religious leaders of the world coming together to lead us out of this? Because I don't see it could ever be a politician or somebody who leads industry. Or, could it be somebody from the general public that rises up, that 14% decide we've had enough? We don't want to live like this anymore. We want to get back to the real human values that we intrinsically know are how we're meant to live, in harmony with each other and in harmony with nature, flipping from fear to love. And I think we live in a very interesting time right now, where the crisis that is happening right now with climate, and some scientists are saying it's happening so much faster than we ever imagined it could. Only last week, I heard one of the climate scientists saying that it's 5 years. So we knew that this was a decade where we had to make dramatic action. So I guess we shouldn't be surprised to hear 5 years, because 2030 was always an absolute goal for us. So how bad does it have to get for that movement to come forward? And who is going to lead that movement, I think is a really interesting thought. And could it be the religious leaders of the world to put aside their differences and say the fundamental similarities between the religions are so much stronger, really, than the differences? Because we all, I think, believe in some kind of a higher power, and we all believe in the power of love. And if we could just focus on that as the unifying thing, then how do we love every single thing that lives on the planet, including our neighbor? And how do we love the natural environment in a totally different way?
And it's beautiful to hear the figure 14% was remarkable, actually. And I'm thinking about this and I was thinking about it as you were speaking, that you're right. In a way, it doesn't need an absolute majority. It needs a significant sum of people to be able to kind of move that, and everybody else kind of. There's so many of us who are fence sitters, and they'll move when that
Yes.
14,
Yeah.
15% kind of moves, and it's just a
But we're scared to
hilarious.
be first. We're scared to, and it's
True,
understandable,
true.
because,
Yeah.
we've been led to believe the current model of consumption is how it's meant to be. I interviewed recently an incredible guy who wrote a book called The Day the World Stopped Shopping. He also wrote a book called The 100-Mile Diet. Really amazing. J.B. McKinnon, he's a Canadian journalist and author. Highly recommend. And we had a whole call about consumption and this whole thing of the world giving up shopping and hyperconsumption, and the people who've opted out, the minimalists. And one of the things he said to me, because I said, you make me feel really bad about the stuff that I own, that I can't pack it into a small overnight case, that I own so much more than that. And he said, don't feel bad. Don't feel guilty. You are bred to be a consumer. From the minute you are born, you are bred to be a consumer. And what we need to do is breed differently. What we need to do is create a different normal, so that it doesn't feel strange to be some kind of eco hippie, and you can keep all your waste in a jam jar and you wear nothing but hemp. Like those people are considered extremists right now. They're considered a little strange. But actually, those people are the future. Those people are the ones that have it right. And what we need to do is create a new normal. And how do we create a new normal is you see it on social media everywhere. You read about it in the newspapers. You see it on the films. And this hasn't happened yet, of us portraying a different way of living, a different vision of what our future could look like, and normalizing it in such a way that it feels very inevitable that we're going to get there. We don't have that still.
Yeah, but I also see that happening as you're speaking, more and more social media posts, more and more youngsters getting involved in this whole movement, especially the current generation, is so purpose led. But as again, I was going to say something that appeared that a memory that came back to me as you were talking about religion and love. I come from a background of open seeking. My parents, particularly my father, was somebody who would just go and meditate with different people and sit, and that's my background. It's just very open that.
Mm,
But my wife comes from a organized religion which is extremely effective in its ways, and I was amazed because it's all based on voluntary volunteers. It's not a paid bishopry and that kind of thing. So it's people coming in and out, and I was like, wow, what if we could run businesses this way with that spirit
mm.
that I want to contribute? So there was this lady one day at my wife's church. I asked her, how do you guys do it? And how do you get this zealousness of contributing towards this cause that you believe in? And she just looked at me straight in the eye and she said, guilt, indoctrination, and fear. I was like, oh, great. And my wife was like, do not listen to her. But it's so interesting that she was just so blank. She was like, that's how you do it. You do
That's
that
how
in
we
your
do it.
business, you'll get it right. Okay,
Yeah.
I know I'm aware of the time, and I have again so many questions, but I'm going to narrow it down so that I let this conversation go to a close and hopefully catch you again in the future. But talk to me about when we look at you were talking about funding earlier. So when I
Hmm.
look at the climate crisis, everybody is centered a lot on energy. They're centered a lot on mobility. But when it comes to packaging, it's the investment is relatively less, although the
Hmm.
waste is so visible. But the whole idea that it's all about carbon, and carbon is more from the
Hmm.
energy and from mobility. So we're going to focus on that, and that's where the money is going to go. How does that narrative shift? How do we get more investment into the space of packaging and materials? How do you see that happening?
It's going to have to come down to regulation, I'm afraid. So again, we come back to laws and policies, fiscal motivations. So that's going to be more, I would imagine, national action plans versus it being just the Global Plastics Treaty. Um, and then the other element is going to be that the hazard of the risk. If you don't change, then you are actually culpable as a shareholder, as a director of the company, for the impact of the material that you are pumping out. And it's interesting. You're right that there's so much focus on mobility, on obviously the food systems, which is another massive contributor to greenhouse gas emissions, and on heat, energy. And plastic has not really been so strongly connected to the climate crisis because people think, well, it's light. It's a byproduct of the fossil fuel industry. So, because it's light, it's low in carbon. But actually, the plastics industry as a country is the fifth biggest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions, the fifth biggest. And it is set to treble. So you can imagine the scale of that. And they reckon now the predictions are that it will account for between 20 and 30% of our carbon allowance. So if you look at that, then you realize, it's just crazy for us not to put a lot more effort into innovating new materials.
Yeah, and I hope the regulation will create an impetus also for the financiers and the funders to invest more in the directions of materials as well. And So there are two aspects of once we invest. One is, how are you seeing scale? Are there ideas that you're very excited about? Especially as you build plasticfree.com and you bring in
Hmm.
more solutions, are you seeing certain directions that are going to be able to build that 100,000 tons and above kind of scale, which is what is needed in order to really find replacements. And then the second part is that we've already created this huge dump of material. And how does that go away eventually? Does that find its own solution? How do you see that, these huge garbage dumps? So again, repeating my two parts. One is scale. How
Mm.
are you excited about certain materials, or how do you see the industry creating scale? And the second
Hmm.
is, there's already that dump, and how does that go away?
We've got to remember that nature fixed the scale problem a long time ago. There is more cellulose in plant matter lying on the floor lying everywhere on planet Earth. There is more in a day than a decade of materials that we have pumped out. So when we talk about abundance, we simply need to look to nature. And it's how we take those materials, how we bake them, mold them, shape them into something useful for us, and make sure that we can give them back as things that are non-toxic. So I think the abundance of raw materials is plentiful. It is out there. We just now need to know how to convert it safely into something that is useful for us, because we're simply borrowing it from nature. We're giving it back. It will all go back there eventually in some form. So we have to think of it as we're borrowing it and making sure that we give it back in a way that nature knows how to take it back. And when you're talking about scale within some of the materials that we're seeing, some of them are scaling faster than others. Some of them have huge opportunity to scale. Seaweed obviously is one that people talk about a lot. But I also know that it's very difficult for these smaller companies to raise the funds. So they spend, I would say, 70% of their time not developing innovation in materials, but looking for money. It has always been thus as an entrepreneur. So I can relate to that, but it really is frustrating to think what could they be doing if they spent 100% of their time with a much bigger bucket of cash to really accelerate innovation. And then the company I referred to earlier, NFW is scaling very fast, and they are looking at nature's abundant materials as their larder. So they're not a mono material; they're using many different materials. But the interior of all the new BMW cars will be using their materials. So that's a sizable um, uh, expansion already. They have 3,000 brands already in their sales pipeline. What they need is significant capital injection so that they can ramp up. And again, this is where it comes down to we need to move the money, and governments can really help with that with fiscal incentives. If you are investing in a new material with this kind of potential to replace toxic and indestructible plastic, then you should be incentivized for that.
Oh, that's wonderful. And the second part of my question about how are you seeing this huge dump of polymers
Yes.
that we've already put there? How does one get over
Okay.
that, even if everything was to shift today to
Ra-
more natural materials?
Radical answer. Don't recycle it. Don't fall for that chimera, for that myth. That we can just take that waste and we can recycle it into what? Something, that's going to be used a couple of times and put in the bin back into the broken system again. No, I think we need to burn it. So I think we should take that waste, we should convert it as safely as we possibly can, waste to energy, but do not think that that is actually the route going forward. And we can continue with the status quo of making things that are used for minutes out of a fossil fuel plastic, knowing that it's going to end up being incinerated and thinking that that's a circular economy. Of course it isn't. So I think that we need to take it out of the system. It's a toxic material. We just need to eradicate it.
Super. And my final two, as much as you want, at some day, hopefully when we meet, I'm going to show you the number of papers I have in front of me and the number of questions that remain unanswered.
Yeah.
But I'll have to stay with that for now. So the final two, you're doing such amazing work. And if you look at the horizon, say maybe 5 to 10 years of Sean Sutherland's and Plastic Free and the Plastic Planet's effort, what is an ideal state? Say 10 years down. Let's not take a 5 year. 5 year is too short. So 10 years down, what is your ideal state that you would like to see the situation and your contribution to feel like for you? What does that look like for you?
I would love to think that we could be a massive part of contributing to the biggest solutions out there. So when we look at things like a nutrient-based fiber bottle, trying to fix some of the biggest polluting products like, I don't know, tires, things like that. I would love us to be part of the catalyst, really, that brings together the innovators at all these different levels, the money, the brands, the governments, to really accelerate solving some of our most pernicious problems. The sachet, for sure. That's the one that drives me nuts. I forget the number. I think it's something like we produce enough tiny little plastic sachets every single year that can go 16 times to the moon and back. Where do we think they all go? So, like yourselves, we've been very involved in flexible packaging solutions. So I love the idea of working on those. I would love to also think that we have used the gateway of plastic to really communicate more about the climate crisis in a much bigger way. And as part of that process, we've perhaps been a little bit influential in helping people remember what it is to be human. Because all of these things are connected. Just like Mother Nature, all of these things are connected. None of them can be treated in silos. So I think if we could be part of bringing all of these things together and accelerating solutions and a different mindset, then that would be something I could be incredibly proud of.
More power to you and the work you're doing. My final question: what does good garbage mean to you?
Good garbage to me means agri-waste. So good garbage would be the waste matter when we have taken the crops for the food that we need and the matter that is left on the ground. That's good garbage because we think of it as waste. We call it agri-waste, but actually it's so far from that. That's nature's cycle. It's going to go back into the earth. But I also love the idea that that's the material that we could borrow and we could make something useful for ourselves and then make sure that it goes back to nature in a really safe, non-toxic way. So good garbage is about agricultural waste.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Sean. These have been such illuminating conversations for me. I've come out of them much richer and in my understanding, and also the belief that what we are doing is so important. And thank you for the work you're doing and the effort that you're putting in, and the purity of your intent is just visible all through. So thank you so much for joining me on these conversations. I know that I've taken a lot of time of yours, but this could have continued for another 10 hours and we wouldn't be done. So thank you so
I
much for the
just
work you're doing.
I feel so sorry for the listener. On and on and on. And another
They'll
thing, and
enjoy
another thing.
it.
Oh, let's see. But Ved, seriously, thank you so much. Thank you for giving me so much time to really, expand on answers. That's really unusual. I don't normally get that opportunity. So that's been a real treat for me. And thank you for all the work that you're doing. And let's hope that perhaps we can do something together. I would really love that.
Absolutely.